What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the vlog. It's a very exciting day. It's a Monday up here and the card room is doing some sort of quads promotion. I don't know, but there's 23 tables running at 1 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. So pretty busy in there. I'm imagining there's gonna be a lot of action. It's also exciting because I finally have obtained permission to film at the tables. I've been working with card room management, and so this is the first day that I get to take footage of the tables. And then they're going to review it, make sure that I followed all the rules and didn't show anybody's faces and stuff like that. And so if you're seeing this intro, it's because I did in fact follow the rules, and moving forward, we should have footage from the table, which I hope will make these vlogs a little bit more entertaining and exciting for everybody. So I'm here all day. I'm ready to build stacks. Let's get to it.
Let me just start off by saying I have some work to do with my camera angles. I'm trying to respect the wishes of card room management and not show any other players' faces in the vlog. I know you can't really see the action of the board, and my chips along the right hand side is blocking some of the action of the players. I promise, as the vlog goes on, I'll get better at this. Off to the first hand. In this first hand, we're opening up a brand new table, and I find myself in the small blind with Jack 7 offsuit. There's two callers, and so I decided to go ahead and call as well, and the big blind checks his action, so we're off to the flop 4 ways. The flop is 5, 6, 7, all spades, and I have the Jack of Spades in my hand, so not a terrible flop. I lead out for $8, but everybody folds. However, the first filmed hand of the vlog is a winner. In this next hand, we're on the button, and we look down at Ace 10 offsuit. There's 2 limpers, and when the action gets to me, I bump it up to $15. We get a call from the small blind, and the action player and +1 calls as well, so we're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is 6, 6, 8. The small blind checks, and +1 bets out for $15. Again, we've only been playing a short time, but she's been very aggressive and active and in almost every pot, so I want to go ahead and put some pressure on her hand, and I raise to $45. The small blind folds, and she instantly calls, so we're off to a turn heads up. The turn is a 9, it's not going to change too much, but she slows down and checks to me. I think about putting on another bet to really put some pressure on her, but I decide to go ahead and check this turn and evaluate the river. The river is a jack, so Queen 10 gets there. When that river card comes out, she jams for $74. I decide to go ahead and let my hand go, and she's nice enough to show 5, 6, so I'm definitely glad I didn't try to apply more pressure on the turn and got away without losing any more money. In this next hand, we're in the cutoff, and we look down at 10 Jack offsuit. There's 2 callers, and when the action gets to me, I go ahead and raise to 10. The small blind calls, and a middle position player calls, so we're off to the flop 3 ways. The flop is Ace King 3 with 2 hearts. The small blind leads out for $15. Middle position folds, and I make the call with my gut shot, so we're off to a turn. The turn's not a great card, it's the 10 of diamonds, so it brings a second flush draw out there, and it puts 3 to a straight. Luckily for me though, the small blind checks, and I decide to go ahead and check through and evaluate a river. The river is the Ace of Spades. The small blind thinks for a moment and decides to bet out $25. He doesn't look very confident in his bet. Both flushes ended up missing, and I'm the pre-flop raiser, so I think I can put pressure on my opponent by representing the ace. I don't have much left in my stack though, so there's really only one move to make, and I raise all in for $109 total. He snaps me off very quickly, and I ask if he has an ace, and he says, no, I have a boat, and he flips over Ace King. My idea on this play wasn't necessarily bad given the way the hand played out, it's just unfortunate that I ran into the stone cold nuts. This next hand's an interesting one, and I'm sure I'm going to get beat up in the comments for it, but I'm actually interested in seeing what you guys have to say about it and how you would play it. We're on the button, and we look down at Ace Queen offsuit. There's a raise from +1 to $10, and it folds all the way around to me, and I decide to go ahead and put in the 3-bet, and I make it $30. The action folds back to +1, who then 4-bets to $60. So, obviously I know I'm up against something like aces or kings, or maybe ace king or queens, but ace queen is a fairly decent hand in position, so I decided to go ahead and make the call so I can see the flop. The flop is 10 Jack 8, so I flop myself a gut shot straight draw, and I also have 2 overs. My opponent bets out for $50. Again, I've kind of already determined I'm probably up against aces, kings, or ace-king, but for only $50, I feel that I can make the call here so that I can evaluate a turn. So that's what I do. I make the call, and we're off to see a turn. The turn is not my favorite card in the world. It's a 7, so now I've picked up a double gutter. My opponent then jams for his last $73. Any 9 gives me a queen high straight, and obviously the king gives me the nuts. And even if I hit an ace, if I'm up against kings or queens, I may actually be good in that case. It's only $73 to win a little over 290, so I'm getting over 4 to 1 to make the call. So perhaps I can get a little bit of luck. So I make the call and we're off to see the river. There's no luck in my future. The river is a 3 of clubs. My opponent flips over pocket aces, and he is plenty good in this situation. We have been playing for less than an hour and we're already down $400. Time to dig ourselves out of the hole. It was at this point that somebody noticed that I had a phone out in front of me, and he asked if card room management was okay with that. And I explained to him that actually I had a vlog on YouTube, and this was the first day I got to take footage at the table, and it generated a little bit of conversation at the table, and a couple people actually ended up subscribing to the channel, so thanks to those guys. I'm interested to see how it affects them playing hands against me now that they know I'm a vlogger. We're in the big blind, and we look down at King 10 offsuit. There's 2 calls before it gets to the button, who raises up to $8. I go ahead and make the call, as do both of the original limpers, and so we're off to a flop 4 ways. The flop is Jack, Queen, blank. I check, and the action actually checks all the way through, so we're off to see a turn. The turn is a king, so I've picked up top pair, and I also have a straight draw. I lead in this instance for $20, trying to build up a pot, and I get 1 caller, so we're off to see a river. The river is a 7, shouldn't really change anything here. I decided to go ahead with top pair and bet out for $25. My opponent thinks about it, but he ends up making the folds, but I get to scoop a pot in my direction. We're in the cutoff, and we look down at pocket queens. There's 1 caller, and when it gets to me, I bump the action up to $12. Only the big blind calls me, so we're off to a flop heads up. The flop is 5, 6, 8. Not a bad flop for queens. She checks, and I bet out for $15. And my opponent cannot call fast enough. And that worries me, that I could be up against a set, or something like ace-6, or ace-7, or ace-8, some sort of pair plus draw, so I'm going to have to proceed with a little bit of caution here. The turn is an ace. So, if I was putting my opponent on one of those hands like ace-6 through ace-8, I've probably run into some trouble here. My opponent checks to me, and I decide to go ahead and check and evaluate the river. The river is a jack of hearts, it won't change much, and once again my opponent checks to me. This is the opponent I made mention of earlier, who was very splashy and very aggressive and in a lot of pots, and she's now checked to me 3 streets in a row. But again, I can't think of how fast she called that post-flop bet, so I end up just checking behind. She shows 8-9, so she was in fact on some sort of combo draw, but for this one I got in my own head, and it was just a reminder to never slow down with your premiums. The table agrees to do a round of button straddles, and when it gets to me it's my turn, and I have 7-8 of hearts. There are 3 callers when the action gets to me, and I decide to go ahead and put the old squeeze in, and I raise to $25. However, everybody folds, and I win this pot. In the very next hand, we look down at pocket 10s. Under the gun bumps the action up to $6, which is a really small raise in this 1-2 game. The action folds to me, and I decide to go ahead and 3-bet up to $20. Under the gun makes the call, so we're off to a flop heads up. The flop is 4, 5, 6 with 2 spades. The action checks to me, and I want to go ahead and continue to build a pot, so I lead out for $30. But my opponent folds, and we scoop another small one in our direction. We're on the button for this hand, and we look down at King Queen offsuit. There are 2 callers before it gets to me, and I bump the action up to $20. Only the under the gun player calls, and so we're off to a flop in position heads up. The flop is 9, 10, 6 with 2 diamonds, so I flop myself a gut shot straight draw as well as 2 overs. My opponent shoves his whole stack, $105. There's a diamond draw on the board, and I don't have a diamond in my hand, so I'm not directly blocking that flush draw. I do have a gut shot and 2 overs, but not much else. And so I decide to go ahead and make the fold here. I don't think I'm getting the right price to make that call, but I'm interested in what you guys think. There's only $49 in the pot, but with a gut shot and 2 overs, do you make the call there? Let me know in the comments. In the very next hand, it's Deja Vu. We look down again at King Queen offsuit. There's a button straddle on this hand and there's one caller. When it folds to me, I go ahead and bump the action up to $20 again. Only the button straddler calls, and so we're off to a flop heads up. The flop is Jack 7-8. I check my action and the button checks behind, so we're off to a turn. The turn is another jack, pairing the board, but it also makes it much less likely that my opponent has a jack, and being the 3-better, I think I can actually represent this jack better than he can. So I lead out for $30. My opponent doesn't take too much time, and he folds his hand, so we're winning another small pot. We're on the button this time, and we look down at 9-10. The action folds to me, and I raise it up to $10. The small blind is my only caller, and so we're off to a flop heads up in position. The flop is 3-7-9, so I flop top pair here. It checks to me, and I decide to go ahead and kind of play it slow and check and see a turn. I probably shouldn't have done that, because the turn is the ace of spades. But the action checks to me again, so I decide to go ahead and bet out $10. My opponent can't get his chips in fast enough to call me, so we're off to the river. The river is the ace of diamonds, and once again my opponent has checked it over to me, so I decided to go ahead and represent the ace in this situation, and I bet out for $30. My opponent quickly folds, and another small pot is coming in our direction. In another questionable situation, we're in the button, and we look down at Ace-8 offsuit. The under the gun player calls and it folds all the way around to me. I bump the action up to $12. The small blind calls and the original limper calls, so we're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is 9 Jack King, all diamonds. It checks to under the gun, who bets for $15. I make the call, as does the small blind, so we're still off to a turn 3 ways. The turn is a 4 of spades. It checks to under the gun, who shoves for his whole stack, $105 total. I do have the ace of diamonds in my hand, but any non-diamond river outside of maybe an ace, I don't really have a play, so I decided to go ahead and let my hand go. The small blind does call, so we're going to see a river. That river is the 7 of clubs. Under the gun flips over King 9 for 2 pair, and the small blind shows Queen 10 for the flop straight. So my diamonds were in fact very live, but it was a lot of money for me to call for at best 7 outs. There's another button straddle. We're in the cutoff this time with Ace-Queen offsuit. There are 2 calls, and when the action gets to me, I bump it up to $20. Only the under the gun player calls, and so we're off to a flop heads up. The flop is 3-7-7. The action checks to me, and I decide to go ahead and lead out for $35. About the same bet I'd make with a large pocket pair, or if I had some sort of draw or combo draw. My opponent thinks about it, but he makes the fold, and we'll scoop this small pot. In this next hand, we're in the cutoff again with Jack 9 of hearts. There's a button straddle, and the very tight small blind raises to $15. A competent player in the hijack makes the call, and I call knowing that if I do, the button will also call, and he does in fact call, so we're off to a flop 4 ways.
4 players.
The flop is Deuce 5-9, all clubs. So it checks to me on this monotone board, and I decide to go ahead and bet out for $25. Only the hijack calls, so we're off to a turn heads up. The turn is a 2 of diamonds. It shouldn't really change much. I don't put anybody on a 2 in this hand, and the hijack decides to lead out for $45. I don't think calling in this situation makes any sense because there's not many rivers that I'm going to like. He might have a set, or maybe Ace-X with the ace of clubs. I think if I want to get my opponent off this hand, I have to be polarizing with my bet size, so I decide to go ahead and shove for my last $149. My opponent lets out a groan, which is probably a good sign, and he doesn't think too long before he folds, and we take this hand down. We're on the button this time, and we look down at pocket jacks. There's a raise from under the gun to $6. There's 1 caller before the action gets to me, and I decide to go ahead and put the 3-bet in to $18. Under the gun then comes back over the top to $36. I decide to go ahead and make the call, and so we're off to a flop heads up. The flop is 3-6 queen, so not a great flop here. My opponent leads for $25, and with such a small size, I decided to go ahead and make the call and evaluate a turn. The turn is the 9 of clubs, putting a club draw on the board. My opponent pauses for a second, then checks his cards and checks to me. I pick up on this as a sign of weakness and that he's searching to see if he has some sort of flush draw, and so I decided to go ahead and pounce, and I bet out for $65. My opponent thinks about it, but then he ends up letting his hand go. There's another button straddle. We are under the gun this time, and we look down at King Queen of clubs. I open the action up to $20. The +1 player calls and everybody else folds, so we are off to a flop. The flop is 4-7-9 with 2 spades. I check and my opponent checks right behind, so we're off to see a turn. The turn is a 10 of spades, putting the flush draw on the board. I decide to go ahead and try to represent spades, and I lead out for $30, and my opponent snap calls me, so I'm probably in trouble heading to the river. The river is a blank. It's a heart. It doesn't really change anything. I'm scared of that snap call on the turn, so I decide to go ahead and just check, and my opponent actually snap checks it back, looking ready to fold his hand. I show him that I have king high, and he ends up having to turn over his pocket threes with the 3 of spades to win. So I guess he was calling the turn, maybe looking to hit his set or a flush on the river. I don't know. I can't really figure out why he's calling me off so light like that. The truth is, I think the only way to win would be to make some sort of polarizing size on the river, like $125 or more, but that's tough to do when you're only looking at king high. Nice hand, sir. We were on the button. We look down at ace-7 offsuit. There's 3 callers before I bump the action up to $11, a size I never raised to. The small blind calls, under the gun, and under the gun +1 all call, so we're off to a flop 4 ways. The flop is king 7-6 with 2 clubs, so I flop middle pair. It checks to me and I continue on for $25. The small blind who called me down with the pocket threes last hand makes the call and everybody else folds, so we're off to a turn heads up. The turn is the 10 of clubs bringing in the flush. I don't have any clubs in my hand, so I decided to just go ahead and check, and my opponent checks as well, so we're off to the river. The river is the 10 of spades. My opponent once again checks to me, and I decide to go ahead and just give up and check here again. Once again, he looks ready to fold, and I ask if he has a pair, and he shows 6-9 for bottom pair of sixes. I flip over my hand, and my a7 is good, and we scoop this pot. We are under the gun, and we look down at pocket queens. I'm going to bump the action up here to $12. The +1 player calls me, and the big blind calls as well, so we are off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is really good. It's 4-queen-6. The action checks to me, and I continue on for $15. My nemesis and +1 calls, the other opponent folds, so we're off to a turn heads up. The turn is a 7 of hearts. I lead for $25 here, trying to milk a little bit of value out of my opponent, and he does not disappoint. He makes the call, so we're off to see a river. The river is a 3, shouldn't really change anything. Once again, I lead out for $25, and he very quickly raises to $100. I'm afraid he may have gotten there with something like a suited ace-5, but my hand is just way too strong to make a fold. I don't necessarily think I should re-raise here because no worse hand is going to call me, so I just make the call. My opponent flips over king-6, and we scoop this one.
Oh, man, I ran into it.
And I was like, God damn it.
Not 2 hands later, we look down at pocket threes.
Cool.
There's 2 callers. I call from the small blind, and the big blind raises it up to $12. 2 of us make the call, and so we're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is really good. It's 3-4-6, so I haven't flopped a set in what feels like 2 years, and now I've flopped 2 of them in like the last 5 hands. I check, looking for a little bit of action out of my opponent, but the action actually checks all the way through, so we're off to a turn. The turn is a 9. I lead out here for $20, and the big blind calls, so we're off to see a river. The river is a 7, so it puts another 4-liner to the straight. I lead out for $25, and my opponent shoves for his last 77. It's very similar to what happened when I had my set of queens, and so I actually call it off pretty quickly, and he shows 5-7 for the straight. So it's frustrating because I was sure my set was good here. I just feel like a yo-yo this session, just winning and losing and winning and losing. I wasn't built to go up and down this much. We're on the button this time, and we look down at ace-10 offsuit. There are 2 calls, and when the action gets to me, I bump it up to $15. Only a middle position player calls, who happens to be a new vlog watcher, so we're off to the flop, heads up. The flop is 4-6-7. The action checks to me, and I decide to go ahead and check here and see a free turn card, so we're off to see the turn. The turn is a board pairing 7, and once again my opponent checks to me. I bet out for $15, and then he puts in the check raise to $45. I'm not really sure what he's doing here, but I think I can find a better situation to make a move against him, so I end up folding. Nice hand, sir. We're in under the gun this time, and we look down at Jack-8 offsuit. I've really taken a liking to Jack-8 lately, so I open the action to $10. I get 2 callers, and so we're off to a flop 3 ways. The flop is 9-10 queen, so I have flopped a straight, but it's a monotone board being all hearts. The big blind checks, I check, and the middle position player bets out for $10. I'm conflicted on what to do because I don't like slow playing hands, but at the same time on this monotone board, I'm also a little bit worried about putting too much money in the pot. I do have the 8 of hearts in my hand, so I do technically have a gut shot straight flush draw, but I don't see many people hit their gut shot straight flush draws very much, so big blind folds and I just make the call here. We're off to a turn. The turn is a 4 of clubs, and this time I take the betting lead and I bet out for $40, and my opponent calls, so we're off to the river. The river is a king of diamonds, so it gives me a 6 card straight. My opponent has about $125-ish, and I want to try to get all of that money, so I go ahead and jam all in. My opponent misheard me though, and he says I check and announces 2 pair. The dealer corrects him and lets him know that I did in fact make an all-in bet, and so this is where I try to do a little bit of acting, and I ask, you have 2 pair? And I look at the dealer and ask, is my bet still binding? My opponent now looks like he's really contemplating a call, so I'm sitting there trying to look as nervous as I can, but my opponent ends up folding, and because we've been friendly, I end up showing him what I have, and he lets me know that that king saved him a lot of money. So my acting almost worked, but in this instance he folds and I scoop the pot as is. This is the last hand of the night, and it is a frustrating one. I am in +1, and I look down at ace-jack of clubs. I open for $12 here, and my only caller is a short stack on the button. He only has about $70, so we're off to a flop, heads up. The flop is great. It's Jack 8-3 with 2 hearts. I check, and the button does exactly what I want him to do. He overbets it and shoves his whole stack. It's perfect. I snap him off, and he shows me Jack 10 of hearts, so I totally have this guy dominated, and we're off to a run out. The turn is the 8 of diamonds, and the river is 6 of hearts, so I'm excited to scoop this final pot, and I'm kind of confused why the dealer is counting out his chips, so I'll let you guys listen to me figuring out what happened.
Oh, he hit on the river?
Yeah. 81.
After realizing that he rivered his flush, I was completely tilted. Not at the player, just at the situation and the fact that I didn't recognize what happened and what I was up against. And I realized that this was probably just not my day, and I decided to go ahead and rack up and call it a day.
So that will wrap it up for this vlog. Man, what a weird session. Obviously I made some really bad plays in the beginning and put myself in a huge hole, and I do that from time to time, and it always sucks having to try to dig yourself out of a hole. I got smart, I tightened up, I'd go up a little bit, then I'd lose a little bit back, then I'd get some of it back, then I'd lose a little bit more. I haven't had a session this swingy and yo-yo like in a really long time, and it was frustrating. I feel like I haven't hit a set in forever. And I was fortunate enough to hit 2 tonight. One of them went pretty well. The other one, though, when the guy gets there on a very similar board to 2 hands before, where he had made a move, that was really frustrating. And then that last hand where everything went the way I wanted it to. Flop top pair. I check in hopes of action. The guy shoves his stack. I mean, it's perfect. And I didn't even notice that he got there on the river. And that was the frustrating part, and that tilted me. And I realized I don't need to be at the card table anymore because now I'm just angry, and I'm gonna start playing way too loose and way too reckless. The table was kind of breaking anyways. 2 big stacks had just gotten up and left. The table was going to die anyway, so I decided to take my leave. Into the game today for $600, out of the game for $265. Ooh, big flash of lightning. So about a $350 loss. Those are never fun. That's 2 pretty big losing sessions in a row. But, you know, whatever. I'm just happy that I can finally bring you guys some table footage, and I'm really hoping that it's going to enhance the vlog and that you guys will enjoy it more, and that we'll start getting more viewers. Make sure if you enjoy the content, drop a like and subscribe, because it'll help the channel grow. The more it grows, the more I can play, the more vlogs I can bring you guys. So, we'll see you next time.
If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more poker content. And you can follow me on Instagram at 7cardflushpoker.